Hi, Mitchell from the Meisters of Brew Homebrew Club here. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about yeast starters. Now, to begin with, I'm no expert. I don't claim to be. What I want to share with you is a method that's worked for me over the years. If you go online and do research on yeast starters, you will find that there is a wealth of information, and everybody does it differently. There are people that do small yeast starters and big yeast starters and use this kind of sugars or that kind of sugars. There's even online calculators for the number of yeast to pitch for a particular temperature and a particular kind of beer. People write scientific papers I can't even understand about yeast online. So, this is just a very simple method, and it works for me. And I just want to share it with you. If it works for you, all the better. Now, a couple of things. I do a very small yeast starter. I've read where people go all the way up to a half gallon, which God bless them if that works. Perfect. But for me, that would cause some real issues with trying to determine original gravity and things like that. I want a very small yeast starter that's just going to get my yeast kick-started and ready to brew my batch of beer. Now, a lot of people use different sugars like I mentioned, priming sugar, corn sugar, honey, things like that. I always use dry malt extract because malt is what you want the yeast to really wake up to and start eating it. If they eat a different kind of sugar, they can quit producing the enzymes that allow them to fully take care of a batch of malt beer. They'll be looking to produce other kind of enzymes to handle these other kind of sugars. I don't want that, so I always use dry malt extract. And as far as the quantity of the yeast starter, I don't want something that's going to affect my beer. So I do a very small one. In fact, I use just 8 ounces of wort to get mine started. So yeast starters, what are they to begin with? Well, it's just a way of getting your yeast going before you pitch it into your 5 gallons of primary. A lot of people say they're not even necessary at all, and that's probably true, especially if you're using something like Y yeast where you've got a smack pack and you break the little pillow of nutrient on the inside, and then as the yeast starts growing, the little packet swells. You can make an argument that that in itself is a yeast starter. If you have any kind of liquid yeast that comes with some kind of nutrient, you notice it's a very small amount. The 8 ounces I use is not a whole lot more than that, but it's a little bit more to get it woken up and get it going. Now, why do you use a yeast starter if people say it's not necessary? There are several valid reasons. One being, if you're going to be brewing a high alcohol beer, a high alcohol beer, like your starting gravity is greater than 1.060, or if you're going to be brewing at colder temperatures, if you're using a yeast packet that is maybe a little bit out of date and you want to just make sure that it still builds up with a good supply of yeast to really take care of your beer. On the other hand, a lot of people say if your yeast has been exposed to warm temperatures for any length of time, it's important to do. I ran across that very situation a while back. I'm a big believer in supporting a local homebrew store, and I do. I love it because it's a place where you can go in and visit and you can talk homebrew. There's always 2 or 3 guys hanging out there. If you have questions, even dumb questions, you can ask them. They're happy to help out. So I do throw business to my local homebrew store, but occasionally there's one item that they might not have in stock and something that they don't normally carry that I have to order from an online homebrew supplier. And I was looking for a particular strain of yeast here a while back. So I ordered this from the online supplier, and I even paid the extra $1 or so to get a cold pack put in with it to keep it cold the whole way here. I had the yeast in 3 days. The cold pack was still cold. I took it right to the refrigerator, felt pretty good about it. Brewed my beer, no problem at all. Just here recently, very similar thing happened. I was looking to brew a particular style of wheat beer. I wanted a very specific packet of yeast, so it wasn't available at my local homebrew store. I ordered it online, paid the extra couple of bucks for the ice pack. Guess what? It took 9 days to get to me. 9 days. By the time I got it, this ice pack was warm. I mean, it was actually nice and warm. The yeast had been packaged right up against it, so the yeast pack was warm. I don't know what that did to it. You might argue nothing. On the other hand, I want to do a yeast starter just to make sure everything's okay. Because before I pitch the yeast into my beer, I'm going to have it in a little container. I'm going to see the fermentation lock bubbling. I'm going to know that everything is okay with that yeast. a lot of people also put hops in their yeast starter, and I want to mention that real quick before we actually get into the way that I do this. I'm trying to think of everything I need to tell you in advance, but hops don't really do a lot in the starter. You have to look back to why are hops in beer to begin with. And it's actually kind of a way of inoculating your beer against infection. You know, the hop oils can protect the beer a lot. And of course, over years, we've found that they also give it some great flavor, and that becomes an integral part of the recipe as the hops you use. But originally, it was there for a medicinal purpose. It protected your beer from infection. You're not going to need that, and you're not actually brewing beer when you're doing a yeast starter. You're raising yeast. That's the one sole purpose. So don't get carried away with different types of sugars or adding hops to it or anything like that. Just make a simple starter that's going to get your yeast going. I should mention also that I can my yeast. You may have noticed that this is a small 8-ounce mason jar. I can them so that I have a little box of these on the shelf when it's time for me to brew. A couple of days before, when I'm ready to do my yeast starter, I just pull it off. I don't have to cook up a batch of starter, do a small boil or anything like that. It's already been done, and this can last for up to a year. And it's very easy, the canning process. I do want to say you should go online and do a web search for how to can tomatoes and vegetables. Did you get that? How to can tomatoes and vegetables. There's a very good little video put out by Lowe's, in fact, so it's professionally produced, got a lot of great information, a lot of detailed stuff. It's only like 7 or 8 minutes long, easy to watch, but it goes through the canning process in a very detailed way, so there's no real reason for me to duplicate that here. I couldn't with the same degree of professionalism that they did. So you should watch that just as a supplement to this video. I'm going to be going through the process here in just a minute so that you can see the whole process and how it's done. It's just they have a greater level of detail, and I highly recommend going and taking a look at theirs as well. Well, I think that's all I want to tell you before we get started. This remaining part of the video is in 2 different sections. The first is how to actually can the wort so that you're ready to go whenever you want to. You've got these little cans of cooked wort that's ready to go, and when I say cans, I was brought up doing that. This is actually a glass jar, of course, but the process isn't hard. In fact, my grandmother did it. My granddad was a preacher, so people of the congregation, it was a rural community, they'd always bring over vegetables and things like that. My grandmother would can them, so I got to watch her do it. I was never interested in it, but my parents did the same thing. They would go out and they would get vegetables and they would put them up, as they called it, you put them up for the coming year. And so they went through a whole day where they would do nothing but canning. They'd pick out a Saturday and they would can all their vegetables. So I watched that as well, but I didn't really learn it, but I was familiar with the process just from having been around it. So when it came time for me to do this, and I started this over a decade ago, I read the procedure, everything fell right in line. I found out how simple it really is. And you're talking about just a couple of hours to produce a dozen or so different little jars that you can use when it's time to homebrew and share with your friends and things like that. All right, that said, let's get into the canning process. Okay, this is a quick look at the canning process. If you watched the video I pointed out earlier, you'll know that you need to put your jars and lids into water that's about 180 degrees. You don't want a rolling boil here. You want it warm enough to sterilize. You can see the steam coming off of that. It's just about to break into a boil, but not quite there yet, and that's where you want to hold these. And once you get that done, just set them aside. They're going to sit there until you're ready to use it. Now, that said, you're going to start preparing to do the brew. Okay, you just keep your jars on the back burner there, keep them at 180. Now, the rest of it is like you're actually brewing beer. You're going to brew a small batch of beer, as it were, without any hops or flavorings or anything like that, just some dry malt extract. Get your water up to a boil, just like you would be doing if you're any brew you've ever done. Okay, now I use dry malt extract, 1 pound, and I use light DME. That's not going to affect the flavor that much of your beer when you use this as a yeast starter, but it is going to give the yeast something wonderful to eat. So put it in just like you would normally do, as much of it in as you can. just like that, and stir it in. Now you'll notice I've taken the pot off of the fire. I've moved it away, so I'm not going to caramelize anything on the bottom of the pan while I'm stirring it and while it's going in. So this is just off to the side, and it's actually sitting on a towel right now to allow me to mix it together and get it all blended in and get everything back into liquid form before I move it back onto the fire. And once that's done, well, I'll take the pot, move it back over to the fire there, and start the brew. And now there we go. Now I'm stirring this just for the effect while I'm making the video. I don't actually stir it that much. I'll give it a good stir and get it going, and then let it actually come to a boil, like I do with all my beers. No big deal. Now some people ask about putting hops in. If you do a lot of reading and research online, you'll find out that there is a school of thought that you ought to put hops in your yeast starter. I don't do that. I don't want to affect the flavor of my beer. Of course, the reason why hops were put in beer in the first place was for the medicinal value. It actually keeps anything from contaminating the beer to some extent, along with the flavor. In this case, that's not necessary. Now, once the boiling starts, you're going to set your timer for 40 minutes and brew just like normal. And you'll see I've come to a boil, so I'm stirring it up here. Not adding anything else, no grains, no hops, nothing special. Just let it boil. Stir it well as your timer's going. Now, what you can't see off camera is I still have the big pan in back that has all of the lids and the jars, keeping those at 180 degrees just below a boil, just keeping them warm so that they're nice and sanitized and ready to go when I need them. Now, doesn't that look good? Well, you should smell it. I love the smell of beer as it's brewing, or wort actually, unfermented beer. It smells wonderful. It smells like grape nut flakes. I love it. It's a wonderful odor. It fills the kitchen. And even I found people that don't necessarily like to drink beer love this part of it because it smells so good. Well, we'll keep stirring and keep mixing. More attention than I would normally give it. Normally it's just every now and then go over and give it a stir and allow it to boil. Now, once that's done, it's actually time to can. Now, you're not going to have to go through a cooling process, so you're not going to need your wort chiller or an ice bath or anything like that. Now, I'll put some of it into a pitcher, as you'll see in the back there. Yeah, that one, it can take the heat, and I'll dry off the rims of the jars, and I fill it to just about ½ inch below the top to 3/4 of an inch below the top. Then I'm going to take the lid and put it on, just carefully right on top like that. Then take the ring and screw that on, just finger tight. Finger tight is all. And watch it; those things are hot too, by the way. Now, once I've done that with all of them, I'm going to move the bigger pan to the fire, and I'm going to put all of the jars of wort inside there and bring it to a boil. Now, once that boil starts, we're going to start the timer again, and we're going to let that boil another 40 minutes. So what that's doing is sterilizing everything inside those jars. The air that just on top of the wort, the wort's already sterile because it was boiled. The jars themselves, everything is getting sterile. Also, it's going to soften the little ring around the top that's going to form the seal that will keep all the bad stuff out while it's just sitting on the shelf waiting to be used. And like I said, that's going to boil for about 40 minutes. Once that's done, get a towel, lay it out, and you're ready to remove these. Now use tongs, and they may even make special ones for this very purpose. I don't use those. I just use my regular tongs. You take them out one at a time, and you set them on the towel. Doesn't that look beautiful? Man, nice golden color. Those look great. So you're going to set them there. And of course I've moved the pan off of the fire at this point. And once they're all out, you can get rid of the water, get rid of the pan. You're just about done. And I'm going to be checking the seals after they cool. Now, do allow them to cool because this gets they're very, very hot at this point to the touch. All right, so sometimes I'll even get those little, as you see them, the little pie coolers there that bring it off the surface so that air can get underneath it as well. And man, those are beautiful. And I just allow them to cool and get them down enough to where I can touch them. You can let them set overnight. At this point, everything is fine. Everything is pretty much done. I just have a couple of steps that I do before finalizing everything. But yeah, let them sit overnight. They're sealed. They're good. You're good to go at this point. Now, I need to get my wife involved for this so I can maybe get her to help me hold the camera, because I want to show you what I do. You have to take the ring off and then check that seal. And I'm not saying pry it up. That's what you're going to do when you open it. When you open it, you'll pry that off. But here, just make sure that you have a good seal on it, that everything is fine. You can handle the jars now because they're cool. Also, you make sure that you have a concave top. While they're cooling, you'll hear them popping. You hear these little sounds as the lids are going in. And this is fine. This is what you want. And that makes a little concave top to it there. And put the rings on and just tighten them down. You don't have to do anything with the strength of Hercules. Just tighten them down. And then write the date on it. That way you'll know when you brewed this, and they'll last a year. All right. Now, I'm sorry to have cut that last part off so abruptly, but I can hardly wait to get to show you the payoff. All that work we just did of canning the wort, getting it ready for yeast starters, I finished that. I put that box of starters up on the shelf, and that's where it has been resting. And now I'm going to be brewing tomorrow, so it's time for me to do a yeast starter. So I only need a few things. The wort is already mixed up, ready to go. I've got a vial of the White Labs yeast. I like this stuff. It's good. I've had it laying out of the refrigerator for 4 or 5 hours now, getting warm, coming up to room temperature, and I've been shaking it as I go by occasionally. I also have a fermentation lock, and then I have a vessel for doing the yeast starter. And yes, you recognize it. That's a water glass. It's the kind you buy at the store that is refillable. It's got a straw that goes in it. And I like 2 or 3 things about this. Number one, this is plastic that has no BPAs. So all the horror stories you hear about chemicals leaching from plastic into the liquids that they contain, not a worry here. This does not have any BPAs used in its manufacture, so that's safe. It also has a double wall, and it's insulated. You see these little bubble things in here? That's actually part of the clear insulation that's in there. So it does have some insulation against heat and cold, which is kind of cool. The interior, the top, has a seal. It's made for making things watertight and therefore airtight. So you can seal it down like that. That's good to go. Also, though, it had a hole in it for a straw. I threw the straw away. I got my drill, and using a sharp bit, I carefully drilled out the hole a little bit bigger so that I wouldn't crack the plastic. And then I got a little rubber washer, two-sided, that goes in here, and that will allow an airtight seal for the fermentation lock. So, with all this, I'm ready to go. Now then, I have sterilized everything. Now, I've already done that, so you don't have to sit through that. Even the jar, the vial for the yeast, everything has been sterilized, including my hands. I'm sterile as well, so that if anything happens to get on my hands and drip down into the wort, then it's not going to contaminate it. Okay, but the reason we went through all that work of canning the wort in advance, it makes this step so easy, because all you have to do is you unscrew the top, and then you pry off. You'll hear, you heard that little burp as it came off, because it's airtight, and it was a concave seal there. The little inside was sealed to the top, so you're going to just take the wort, pour it in. That's ready to go. Now, take your yeast, make sure it's all mixed very, very well. Now, this has a kind of pressure built up inside of it. It's like a bottle of champagne. So when you open it, a lot of people just rinse it right off, and it goes everywhere, all over your hands and everything else. I like to just kind of open it just a little bit, and you hear that, you hear the pressure escaping there. I'll let that finish off, and then a little bit more, until I can just take the whole thing off without it exploding. And I dump it right into the wort. That's it. You're done. Your yeast starter is ready. Put the top on, get the seal going there, give it a little spin, and The fermentation lock goes on top. I'll be putting some water in the fermentation lock as soon as we're done. And then I just take it to a place where the temperature is going to be proper for the yeast. And every package of yeast, no matter who the manufacturer is going to tell you what temperature it does best at. Try to keep it at that temperature. And it's going to sit and it's going to get ready to brew, hopefully by tomorrow. But the great thing about it is that when I'm starting my brew, I'll know that my yeast is ready to go. I'll actually see activity, I'll see the bubbling, and I'll have confidence that when I'm ready, the yeast is going to be ready to pitch. So I hope that helps. I found this to be a really, really easy way, and I hope it works out for you too. Well, just to wrap things up, I wanted to show you what the results are. Here we are, not really even 24 hours since I put the yeast in the yeast starter, and you can see it's already starting to do its thing. The yeast are growing, they're multiplying, and by the time I actually do the brew and I'm ready to put the yeast into the primary fermenter, they're going to be really going strong, and I like to see that. I like to pitch yeast that are active. I know that they're healthy and they're ready to go. Well, thanks again for watching the video. Like I said, I'm not an authority. This just works for me. It has for a long time. I hope that it does for you. But I do appreciate you taking the time to watch the video. Happy brewing.